Meet the Mets. Meet the Mets. Wow, everybody, the New York Mets have just set the bar. And for many Met fans, you got a taste last offseason. You got a little morsel. You got a little appetizer last year with Francisco Lindor, that historic contract. But the Mets would not be denied Max Scherzer multiple hours in what felt like Met fans just waiting it out for the last 24 hours. The news slowly leaking that the Mets are getting close, slowly leaking that the Mets are the favorite, slowly leaking that Max Scherzer was in the final stages of his decision. And finally today, the New York Mets have officially signed Max Scherzer for a historic contract that blows everything out of the water. $130 million for 3 years. And to put that in perspective, that's $43.3 million per year, which beats last record set by Garrett Cole, earning $36 million annually. A historic day for the New York Mets for multiple reasons. We'll get into how this alters the franchise and what it means going forward, and how one person really sent a message to Major League Baseball. But let's start with the baseball side of this first. And the clear thing is the New York Mets just got a lot better. The New York Mets arguably now have the best 1-2 punch in baseball if Jacob deGrom is healthy next year with Max Scherzer. Both of them lead Major League Baseball in ERA in the last 5 years. Scherzer, of course, the big gamer, has won a World Series. Both have had great playoff experience, but Scherzer coming in at 37, and last year 15-4, but even better, loves pitching at Citi Field. Career record 10-2 with an ERA under 2 pitching at Citi Field. And look, the Mets still have a long way to go this offseason. It's been a great start, but there's still a lot of questions. What happens with Javi Baez? What happens filling out the rest of the rotation? But it does make things a lot easier when now they can focus on back-end rotation. They can focus on the bullpen. And really, after losing out on Trevor Bauer, which in retrospect was probably one of the best things ever for this Met organization, they not only get a great pitcher, they get a great team leader, and they get a guy who is known for being uber competitive and wanting to win. And the Mets really are trying to change the culture and trying to bring in a guy who is desperate to win. And look, the Mets, they're trying to win in a division which has crowned the last 2 World Series champions with the Atlanta Braves and the Washington Nationals. So the Mets, of course, making the big splash. And if this works out, the New York Mets would be they'll be a hard team to face in October. They really have an unbelievable rotation. And of course, they still have to figure out the back end of the rotation, but we'd love to hear from you guys. Put it in the chat what your thoughts are, Met fans. Would love to hear from you on this historic day. And this to me was more than just about baseball on the field, because of course, Scherzer improves his rotation, and everyone's going to say, well, the Mets paid an astronomical price for this guy. And yeah, but they also only are paying for him for 3 years. And if you get 2 great years out of Max Scherzer, I will be more than happy. I'd rather have a 3-year contract with a stupid annual salary than pay a guy for 10 years and hope he's good for 7 or 8 of them. So great job by the front office. Great job by the Mets making this happen. And it gives them a little insurance in case Jacob deGrom has to miss a little time next year, or if deGrom isn't ready to go at the beginning of the season. So that's also a big plus. But to me, the big story about this, and what I try to focus on, is the bigger story here. And obviously, the headlines and what people will be talking about is how the Mets got better as a team. And obviously, that's the case. And they got a great pitcher. And arguably, they now have 2 of the top 4 pitchers in baseball, maybe top 3. But to me, this is a day where the culture of the New York Mets has changed. And it started last year when Steve Cohen finally bought this organization. They went out and had an aggressive offseason last year, and of course fell short this past season, and a lot coming into this offseason with the team being free agency, and more importantly, be able to shake off the old Mets regime, because in this whole offseason with the Mets taking forever to finally hire a general manager, having general managers turn this job down a couple of times, it just seemed like the nonsense of the Wilpon era and the previous Met regime was still going on. And of course, Steve Cohen took to Twitter last week after the Mets couldn't get Steven Matz to resign. And even Marcus Stroman went to Twitter saying the Mets aren't prioritizing me, they're prioritizing other people. It just looked like, and for Met fans, you just felt like this is the same old mess. This is the same old team. But Steve Cohen really sent a message. And I do think there is a lot behind this signing. It's not only sending a message that the Mets are going for it this year and that the Mets are going to be all in and that they are going to be aggressive, but reading in between the lines here, there's another message within this. And that is Steve Cohen just sent a message to every single prospective player, and he sent a message to every single agent across the sport of Major League Baseball. And that message was, no one is going to outspend the Mets. We are going to give you top dollar. We are building a winning culture here, and we are going to be all in. Because one of the criticisms that came out over the last couple of weeks from the Mets side, and they've made it public, which is they were not happy that Noah Syndergaard did not come back to him. It's come out that Syndergaard did not come back to the Mets after getting his offer with the Angels. Then, of course, there was the Steven Matz contract where Steve Cohen publicly tweeted that he was upset with how the agent handled it because Steve Cohen was under the impression that Steven Matz and his agency going to come back for a counteroffer. Well, Steve just sent a message to Major League Baseball, which is get your contract on, but to the Mets last, make sure you check in with us before you sign, because if we want you, we're not only going to pay you, we are going to pay you handsomely. And I think that this was also a subtle shot across the bow to both Noah Syndergaard and Steven Matz, basically saying, hey guys, remember how you didn't want to come back to me for a negotiation in our organization? Well, look what we just did. We made Max Scherzer not only the highest paid pitcher in Major League history on an annual salary, but we did it by a significant margin. So you have to look at that from Steve Cohen and this organization, basically to every player in free agency. To Javi Baez, yes, you can go talk to the Detroit Tigers. Yes, you can go talk to other teams. But before you sign, you better check back with us because we will give you the best offer. We don't care about the luxury tax. We don't care. And look, the Mets have, before this deal, had spent over $100 million improving this team to get a starting center fielder and likely two very good rotational and bench pieces for this team before they signed Max Scherzer. And I don't think they're even close to being done this offseason. There's still a lot of moves to be made to improve the bullpen, back end of the rotation, and figuring out the pieces like where does Jeff McNeil fit in this team's future, Dominic Smith. There's still a long way to go in this offseason, but this just sent a message to Major League Baseball that the Mets are in. Because even last offseason with the addition of Francisco Lindor, Met fans still felt disappointed, and you felt a little frustrated especially by the end of the season when you looked at the Mets last year where they were in on George Springer and they weren't able to close the deal. And then they were in on Trevor Bauer. They were close but couldn't close the deal. And it was still a great offseason, but you felt like, okay, the Mets couldn't close the deal and didn't make the statement that Steve Cohen is the richest owner in baseball. And you were hoping Steve Cohen would kind of be like the next Steinbrenner, where he basically didn't care how much it would take. He was going to be all in. And this move single-handedly has put the Mets into the heavyweight class in Major League Baseball. They're up there with the Boston Red Sox, the New York Yankees, and the LA Dodgers in terms of teams that are going to spend a ton of money and don't necessarily care about how much money they have to spend. So I have to give this organization a lot of credit. They get a great pitcher. They get someone to hedge their rotation if Jacob deGrom has to miss any time next year. But you look right now, if the Mets can get to the postseason, they have a great 1-2 punch. And really, like I said, to me, this was more than just about the baseball on the field. Because, yes, this drastically improves this team. This improves the clubhouse, which we knew was a problem last year about in terms of guys who were desperate to win. And they've been saying they want to change the culture. And look at the guys they brought in this offseason. They're all culture guys and they all want to win. So you look at that, coupled with the fact that the New York Mets are trying to win a championship and have basically now sent a message to every agent and player in baseball. This is incredibly important because if the Mets are interested in a client and they basically have told the agents, like, we're interested, every single agent now with a player, it would be basically malpractice if you didn't go back to the New York Mets now. Because basically the Mets said, because Max Scherzer had made it clear that he wanted to go to a winning team. He preferred the West Coast. It looked like the Dodgers, it was going to be their guy to lose. And basically the Mets recruited him. They did an incredible job recruiting him. And of course, they basically said, we're not leaving until we get a deal done. And they got the deal done. So if the Mets really want your client, Mets really want you as a player, they are going to quote Jurassic Park, spare no expense. And they did that. I mean, we're not just talking about, they beat Cole's annual average by another 2 or 3 million. I mean, this is almost $10 million more. I mean, Cole was 36. I mean, it's 36. Scherzer earning about 43.3. So the Mets right in that ballpark, spending money. And look, they're not going to be done. They still have moves to make. But it's a new era because with the Wilpons, you would be lucky to get a big free agent. And if you did and it didn't work out, the Mets were paralyzed with fear that, okay, we can't spend another big contract because we can't get locked in the bad contract. Steve Cohen, like, one of the things he just said, like, many people are now starting to question a little bit, like, did they go a little bit too early on Lindor? I still think Lindor is a very good player. Could they have waited it out until the end of the offseason before giving him that historic offer? But you look, instead of being paralyzed by fear and being paralyzed saying, oh my God, I don't want to do another bad contract or another potentially huge contract to another player, Steve Cohen said, you know what? I don't care. I'm going out there and I'm going to open my checkbook. I'm going to open my wallet and I'm going to spend and get players. I'm not going to be paralyzed by fear. And that's one of the things that I think Yankee fans are frustrated by across the river, because the New York Yankees, their old motto was, we don't care how much we're spending. We don't care if we make mistakes, we will outspend those mistakes. Now, ever since the Giancarlo contract, they've been hesitant. You can tell they don't want to go out of their way and spend a huge money. Yes, they made the Cole contract, but outside of that, they've been more frugal. They've been trying to be more smart. Whereas the Mets just basically said, to hell with it. We're just going to spend money and we're going to go out there and get the best pitcher on the free agent marking by a mile. And you look right now, if the Mets can somehow bring back Marcus Stroman, and I know Stroman's upset, but the Mets just sent a message also to Marcus Stroman, who's basically said, oh, I am not a priority. I'm not this. Like, I'm going to, like, he's unhappy with the Mets. He's called them out on Twitter. If Marcus Stroman gets a contract, I guarantee you the Mets are probably in the position where they're going to be like, Marcus, look, we know you're not happy with how we've handled the negotiation, but we're going to give you a better offer to stay in New York, to stay home, than any team's going to give you. We're going to pay you more money than any team's going to pay you. And if they can bring back Marcus Stroman, who's basically a great one or a high-end number 2 as your 3 starter, that is a great rotation going into next season. Of course, the Mets still have a lot of work to do. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here. But if you're a New York Met fan, you have to be thrilled. You have to be excited, because this is one of those signings which feels like it's the start of a new era. I mean, we've seen moves historically by this franchise which felt pivotal. I mean, we talked about bringing Keith Hernandez into the 80s. We talked about bringing in Mike Piazza. We've talked about the signing of Carlos Beltran and Pedro Martinez. This is one of those signings where you go, it feels like it changed. Even Lindor last year was nice, but you can debate if Lindor is one of the best shortstops in baseball. You cannot debate that Max Scherzer is, without question, top five. I put him in the top three pitchers in baseball. And if you had to win a game in the postseason, there's a short list of pitchers you want out on the rubber. I mean, it's basically Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, and the list is very short after it. So, James of Flatbush, thank you, Uncle Stevie. Yes, Uncle Stevie coming through. And I know some fans didn't like that he got back on social media. I know some people were killing about the Steven Matz and Noah Syndergaard, but to me, I think it shows a guy that really wants to win. And to me, this contract, like I said earlier, this move to me was made in spite because of what happened with Matz and because of what happened with Syndergaard. Because both of those agents and the Mets were under the impression, and look, in business and in negotiations, guys don't have to come back to you. I get that. But Steve Cohen was under the impression that both were going to at least come back, and Noah Syndergaard never came back, and it's clear Steven Matz never came back for another offer. And I think Steve Cohen wanted to send a message not just to them, but to Major League Baseball saying, all right, guys, okay, that's fine. You can negotiate with other teams. I don't care. But if you don't come back and negotiate with us and we're interested in you, you'll probably regret it because we will outpay what they are going to pay. And I understand certain Major League Baseball players, they care more about winning, but the Mets now at least are showing people like, look, they want to be in competition. They want to win a World Series, and they're going for it. And they've shown the last two off seasons, they don't care what the price tag is. They're going for it. They're going to try to win a World Series. And on top of that, how attractive is that to a free agent? There are three big things which are appealing about the Mets. And I know a lot of people love to bang on the Mets, but there's three things about the Mets that are attractive now. Number one, they're showing you they don't care how much it takes to win a World Series. They're going to spend as much money as possible. They have the richest owner in baseball. Number two, they are going all in. And on top of that, if you are going to the Mets and they want you, they will pay you whatever they want. They paid Sterling Marte well above the market average. They paid Max Scherzer a historic amount of money. And number three, if you win with the New York Mets and you win a World Series, you will never be forgotten in the biggest market in the country. I mean, think about this. We saw it this summer in the 30 for 30 on the Queens one about the New York Mets, the 4-part documentary, which was brilliant. Those players, their legacy would not be what it is if they didn't win the New York Mets. You saw the impact. We are still talking about those players, those moments, those guys, and it's been 30 years. How many guys get remembered like that and that fondly by a fan base 30 years later? So there are three things going for the Mets right now. And look, as a Met fan, it's been a frustrating 12 months because even though Steve Cohen bought the team, you dealt with all the BS with the general managers last year, with trying to hire a general manager this year, and then not sure about the general manager that you hired this year. And then last year having a lead and not being aggressive at the deadline and not going for it, and having the Braves catch you and having one of the worst second halves in baseball and finishing under 500 and just being embarrassed and have to watch the Braves win the World Series. In some ways, you would have thought some owners, like that was one of the biggest worries, I think, for Met fans underlying was, is Steve Cohen going to back off, or is Steve Cohen going to get nervous because he spent a lot of money and it didn't work out? Well, he's sending a message now. I mean, the Mets already spent over $100 million, and now they signed Max Scherzer for over $100 million. I don't think they're close to being done. Sorry about that, guys. But again, to me, the biggest thing isn't necessarily about the baseball. Because, look, the Mets got better on the field. The Mets got one of the best pitchers in baseball. They got one of the best clutch pitchers in baseball. That, to me, is what everyone's going to talk about, and rightfully so. But to me, there's a bigger thing here, and that is changing the perception of this organization and, more importantly, sending a clear and loud message to Major League Baseball from Steve Cohen. He's basically telling Major League Baseball, I am the richest owner in baseball. I'm going to spend whatever it takes to win a World Series. And if you are a prospective agent or player and we're in negotiation with you, you better come back to us, because if you don't, you'll regret it, because we're not just going to pay you, but we're willing to overpay you just to get you here to try to win a World Series. So big day for the Mets. We'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our New York Mets content throughout the offseason. Thank you guys for joining us here today, and I'll see you later. But till next time, Max Scherzer is a New York Mets, and as Pete Alonso would love to tell you today, LFGM.